Welcome back to You Have a Brain by Dr. Ben Carson. Enjoy reading. Chapter 3. Gone. When I was small, I could hardly wait for my dad to come home from work in the afternoon. I'd sit on the porch of our house, watching, until I'd see him striding down the alley toward our house. Then I'd run and leap into his arms. He would swing me up into the air and carry me into the house, laughing and talking with me as we went. By the time I was school age, I knew my father was spending less and less time with us, but I thought we had a happy family. I was only 8 years old, and my brother Curtis, 10 on the day our mother sat us down and told us, "Boys, your father has moved out of this house. He's not going to live with us anymore." In tears, I pleaded with Mother to explain why he was moving out. I begged her to make Daddy come back. She said she couldn't, and finally went so far as to tell me, "Your father has done some really bad things." I had no idea what that meant. So for a long time I prayed that my father would come back and say he was sorry so Mother would forgive him and we could all be a family again. When I told Mother what I was praying for, she told me it wasn't that simple. I still didn't understand. Several years later, I learned that my father had been living a double life since before I was born, complete with a second wife and another set of children. When Mother learned that shocking truth and informed him she couldn't and wouldn't live with a bigamist, he packed up all of his things, moved out, and went to live full-time with his other family. When he left, our father took all of our family's money, including the small savings our mother had managed to store up by scrimping over the years. He soon quit paying child support, leaving Mother with nothing but a small house, no savings or income, and 2 active sons to raise on her own. To make matters worse, she had never held a paying job, had no job skills, and possessed only a third-grade education. The only skills she had were the ones required of a housewife and mother. So she began cleaning houses, taking care of other people's children, and sometimes cooking for 2, 3, or more well-to-do families at a time. Many mornings she left before dawn and didn't return from her second or third job until after Curtis and I were in bed for the night, which meant sometimes 2 or 3 days might go by without us seeing her. She would call home to check on us after school, make sure we were home, find out how our day had gone, and ask for a progress report on our chores and homework before we could go out to play. And when she didn't have something ready in the refrigerator for us to heat up for supper, she would have the ingredients there for a simple and nutritious meal we could fix ourselves. After having our mother at home with us for our entire lives, it was unsettling that she was suddenly gone so much. We knew the adjustment must be as hard for her as it was for us. We could see how hard she worked by how physically exhausted she always was, but she explained that she had to work as many hours as possible each day, for as many families as she could fit into her schedule, if there was any hope to pay the bills and keep our house. As hard as she worked, Mother soon realized she was in a deep financial hole that she couldn't dig out of without help. Rather than fall behind on the monthly mortgage payments and lose our little house, Mother came up with an alternative plan. She rented out our home to another family for enough money to cover the mortgage each month. Then she accepted the invitation from her older sister and brother-in-law, Aunt Jean and Uncle William Avery, to live with them in Boston until she could get back on her feet financially. Mother could find the same kind of work there, and without housing and utility expenses, she could save up money over time, pay old bills, and build another small financial cushion. She hoped before long to be able to go back home to Detroit. Aunt Jean and Uncle William Avery's own kids were grown, so they had a lot of love to shower on Curtis and me. And the tenement house they lived in wasn't a house at all, but rather a rundown apartment building. And our new neighborhood was a lot rougher than where we had lived in Detroit. Huge rats roamed in packs through the weeds out back. Once, someone killed a large snake in the basement of our building. After we heard that, we decided that wasn't the best place to play. On our way to and from school or the grocery store, Curtis and I frequently walked past or even stepped over homeless drunks asleep on nearby sidewalks. And all hours of the day and night, police cars raced by with sirens blasting and lights flashing. Curtis and I thought one great benefit of moving to Boston was the opportunity to develop something of a big brother-type relationship with 2 of our Avery cousins. We didn't spend a lot of time with them because they lived on their own and only came home for holidays and special family occasions. Once in a while they would bring home some of their friends, but they always made a point of talking and roughhousing with us whenever they were there. We'd never before had a chance to spend time around guys in their late teens and 20s, and having them treat us like friends and brothers was a great new experience for us. Those times our cousins came home must have created mixed emotions for Aunt Jean and Uncle William. They always acted glad to have their grown children back in the house, but my aunt and uncle knew some of their sons' friends were mixed up with gangs. They worried that their boys were quickly getting involved in the local drug culture. I didn't know anything about that until the day we learned one of their sons, someone I'd come to love and look up to, had been killed in a street shooting not far from where we were living. I was devastated. The adults didn't talk about it much around Curtis and me. But Mother made certain we knew the murder wouldn't have happened if our cousin hadn't gotten involved with the wrong crowd, where the combination of alcohol, drugs, and violence predictably resulted in an all too common and deadly end. Mother made it clear that our cousin's death had been an unnecessary tragedy and a terrible waste, the direct result of bad choices he'd made. Witnessing the wrenching grief of our aunt and uncle drove the lesson home, and I vowed never to forget it. I determined I would use my brain to think about the consequences of my actions, to make better decisions, and never to cause that much pain and anguish for my mother or anyone else I loved. Fortunately, a dream for my future had entered my life, born one Saturday morning during church. I naively believed that this plan would help keep me from ever being tempted to get into that kind of nightmarish trouble as I grew up. Our head minister related an exciting true story about a missionary doctor and his wife being chased by robbers. When the fleeing couple came to the edge of a cliff, there seemed to be no place to go until they spotted a cleft or crack in the rock, just big enough for the two of them to crawl into. So by the time the bandits approached the precipice, the doctor and his wife seemed to have vanished. The frustrated robbers stomped around but eventually left, and the missionaries were safe. God had protected them. I was still replaying that story in my mind when the preacher concluded his sermon and asked if anyone in the congregation wanted to give his or her life to Jesus. Without hesitation, I stood and walked to the altar at the front of the church where the minister was standing. He prayed with me as I asked Jesus into my heart. I was 8 years old, so I didn't understand a lot about what my prayer meant. But after that day, I knew two things. I wanted Jesus to watch over my life as he had watched over that missionary couple, and I knew that I wanted to be a missionary doctor when I grew up. As we walked home from church, I told my mother about my decisions. When she heard the part about wanting to be a missionary doctor, she stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, turned, and looked right at me. "Bennie," she said, "if you ask the Lord for something and believe he will do it, it will happen." I will never forget that moment. Indeed, I've recalled my mother's reaction countless times over the course of my life, often when I needed encouragement. She had clearly heard my heart and had understood and affirmed the dream I believe God had given me. One of Mother's own dreams, which Curtis and I shared, came true when her personal financial recovery plan finally came to fruition. It took 2 years in Boston, but at the end of my 4th grade year, she had saved enough money to move back to Detroit. Mother wasn't sure about covering all the moving costs and also taking on mortgage payments right away, so she decided she'd continue to rent out our own house, and she'd rent a smaller place not far from our old neighborhood until she could be certain about her budget. It felt like a big step back to normalcy, just to be near friends in Detroit again. Unfortunately, our return to Detroit brought a problem none of us had anticipated. For our 2 years in Boston, my 3rd and 4th grade years, and Curtis's 5th and 6th, he and I had attended a small church-sponsored school where we'd been among the better students. But when we returned to Detroit schools, we found ourselves way behind our classmates. I was so far behind in every single one of my subjects that some of my classmates called me dummy out on the playground. I didn't like that at all, but I was painfully aware of how far behind I was and how much I didn't understand in class. So I figured I deserved it. Laughing and shrugging off the name-calling probably egged them on. So it wasn't long until they dubbed me the dumbest kid in 5th grade. By that time, I had plenty of poor test grades to make me believe that. So it seemed pointless to take offense or disagree with them on that either. Then one day, I heard someone laughingly say, "Hey, Carson's the dumbest kid in the world." I thought, wait just a minute. I bet somewhere in the world there has to be someone dumber than me. Unfortunately, that very afternoon, the teacher gave us all a math quiz. When we finished answering all the questions, we were to exchange papers with a neighbor and grade each other's quizzes as the teacher read the answers. Then the graders would count the correct answers, write the number at the top of the page, and hand them back. At that point, the teacher would go through her grade book, and we were to tell her our scores when she called our names. Just that morning, I'd been arguing my case that I was not the dumbest fifth-grade kid in the world. But when I got my paper back, it had a great big 0 at the top. I hadn't gotten a single answer right on my quiz. Those guys I'd been debating with were going to laugh like never before when they heard that. Maybe if I mumble my score when she calls my name, everyone will misunderstand. That was the best plan I could come up with. On the spur of the moment. So when I heard my name called, I lowered my voice and softly mumbled, "Nin yu nunin." "It worked," the teacher exclaimed. "9, that's wonderful, Benny, that's real improvement." There had been 30 questions on the test, so 9 right still would have been an F, but it would have been higher than usual. She continued, "Just keep on working those practice problems, Benny. You're obviously catching on." At that point, the girl who had graded my quiz was waving her hand furiously. When the teacher finally quit praising me and called on her, she announced in an exasperated tone, "Benny said none, not 9. He didn't get any right." The entire class exploded in such riotous laughter that I know the teacher was embarrassed for me. I felt so humiliated, I would have gladly disappeared into the cracks in the floorboards, never to return to that classroom or see any of those classmates again. The all-time low came a few weeks later when Curtis and I received our midterm grade reports. We came home from school and left the report cards on the kitchen table without a word to our mother. Maybe we were hoping she'd mistake them for trash, accidentally pitch them in the garbage, and lose them forever. She didn't. No sooner had she come in the house that evening than she picked up those report cards and studied them silently for a few minutes. She then called for us. When we walked into the kitchen, she reached out and pulled us both close and looked right in our eyes. I had figured she would be upset, but the look in her eyes and the sound of her voice was more like sadness than anger as she told us, "Boys, if you keep making grades like this, you'll spend the rest of your lives sweeping floors in a factory. And that's not what God wants for you. He gave you amazing brains, and He wants you to use them." I tried to brush off her concern by reminding her that these were just midterm grades. They didn't really matter. She would have none of that. She insisted the grades did matter because they told us what our final grade for the term would be if we didn't change. And she obviously thought things needed to change, and fast. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, "but God promises in the Bible to give wisdom to those who ask. So tonight, I'm going to pray for wisdom. I'm going to ask the Lord what I need to do to help you." With that, she sent us to our room for the night and said she'd tell us tomorrow what God said needed to happen. Curtis and I went to bed right away, but I had a hard time falling asleep while worrying what in the world God might say to our mother. Thank you so much for joining us on this reading adventure on You Have a Brain by Dr.Ben Carson. We hope you've enjoyed our content and found it enlightening. If you've liked what you've seen and read, we'd be thrilled if you could give us a thumbs up, share our channel with your fellow book lovers, and subscribe for more amazing reading experiences. Until next time, happy reading.